You are not supposed to be here. It is past the second call to prayer. The lamps in the Topkapı Harem have been turned low, and the marble holds the day's heat like a secret. Outside, the Bosphorus is only black silk with silver breath, but inside, behind screens carved with tulips and stars, the empire is still awake. Not the janissaries, not the viziers, the women. They say the Sultan's harem was just perfume and music, a cage of smiles for a bored monarch. That's the story men told themselves. But tonight you see the real room. The Valide Sultan on the raised cushion, eyes like coins that have seen 3 reigns. The favorite consort in green silk, pulse bright with ambition. 2 Kalfas standing silent as pillars. And in the shadows, a young Circassian girl pretending to pour sherbet, while she listens harder than she breathes. On the low table, not jewels, letters, seals, a map. A name. A eunuch closes the door and the night becomes a vault. No one speaks Ottoman too loudly. Walls in palaces are curious things, but they all understand what's on the table. Who will be heir, who will be married off, which pasha will rise, which mother will fall. Men will think they decided it at the divan tomorrow. They didn't. You smell ambergris, rosewater, parchment hot wax. You hear bracelets shift like quiet chains. A caged nightingale sings once and is hushed. Secrets are not to be echoed. One of the women slides a pearl-inlaid box forward. Inside is a small folded decree with no signatures yet. The Valide taps it once with a finger heavy with authority older than any soldier's sword. This, her look says, is the empire. Outside, the moon pretends not to watch. Inside, the future of princes is measured in cups of coffee and women's grudges. What happens in this room will be announced tomorrow as if it came from God, or from the Sultan's own wise head it didn't. Tonight, you will know why. You stand inside Topkapı Palace, where the corridors bend like script and the night smells of rosewater, coffee and warm stone. The empire is Ottoman, its crown borne by Sultan Süleyman I of 1520-1566, whose armies have taken Belgrade 1521 and Budin Buda 1541, whose fleet writes his name on the Mediterranean with oars. The city fears only 2 things, the Sultan's silence and the moment the palace wakes to a new heir. Fact first, cool as marble. In 1533-1534, Süleyman breaks a long habit and marries his favorite, Harem Roxolana, not just a consort now, but Haseki Sultan, a title with purse strings. In 1536, his childhood friend and Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha is executed after a night summoned to the palace. The divan declares it necessary. The streets learn to whisper softer. Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, sits at the top of the women's court like a still star, above a tide of kalfas and odalisks, black and white eunuchs, teachers, scribes, guards. The room called the harem is not one room at all, but a locked government with carpets. Rumor moves quicker than fact, shameless and perfumed. They say Harem laughed, while sorcerers burned knots for her. That a love letter turned the empire. That a small bottle of attar hid a louder poison. That late coffee meant an early grave. They say princes are weighed at midnight on scales you cannot see, and that the heaviest thing in the palace is a mother's grievance. Another rumor, softer and more dangerous, says the Sultan is most persuadable not by armies, but by grief. That the bedchamber writes what the chancery only copies. You stop in the breath between lamps and listen for paper. The women know how the city thinks. They understand that tomorrow's decree must look as though it fell from Allah's weather. The Valide lifts a brow, and a chief eunuch brings a lacquered tray. Sealed notes from provincial beys, a petition from the janissaries, a folded mushaf no one will quote aloud, and a small map of Karaman with the neatest circles around it. You smell amber and ink, and the faint sting of tallow cooling. The favorite consort's hands rest in her lap, like 2 cats pretending to sleep. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. You let that scholar's sentence settle like a warm coin in your palm. Winter which, perhaps 1533, the winter of the marriage that rearranged the furniture of power. Perhaps 1535, 1536, when Ibrahim's star guttered in silk. The exact snow doesn't matter. The letters exist. Careful, grammatical, urgent, full of bread prices, pilgrimage gifts, small kindnesses that don't survive in ballads. They speak of a woman arranging stipends for servants and alms for widows, with the same hand that writes to the Sultan about envoys and grain. Perfume and politics share a shelf. Fear lives here, but it wears manners. A prince sleeps under a quilt embroidered with tulips, and somewhere a clerk sharpens a reed to decide his future. The empire is not strongest on the battlefield, though it is strong there. It is strongest between midnight and dawn when women count. Favors, enemies, cups, hours. You hear the future clear its throat behind a screen. A nightingale sings once. A bracelet hushes it. The Bosphorus breathes against the walls like a patient drum. You're not supposed to be here. But you are, and you finally understand the fear of the palace. That the loudest room, the divan, only repeats what the quietest room. The harem has already chosen. Every empire has a tenderness it hides under silk. In this palace the tenderness has names you whisper. Hürrem, Mahidevran, Mustafa, Ibrahim, and a title that matters more than any jewel, Valide Sultan. Begin where the ache starts. Hürrem Roxolana did not enter as a princess. She came as a captured Ruthenian girl, converted, educated, risen by wit and weather to the Sultan's notice. Fact sets a bead of water on the glass. She bore Shehzadeh Mehmed 1521, then Selim 1524, Bayezid 1525 to 1526, later Cihangir 1531, and in 1533 to 1534, Suleiman married her, an event so rare that scribes sharpened their adjectives. Her wound is foreignness remembered, the knowledge that a smile can be a shackle, that love in palaces is measured by stipends and doors that open. She learns quickly that the strongest iron in Istanbul is the law of succession, cold and impartial, and that a mother's future is fastened to the future of her sons. Across the courtyard, another wound sharpens its knife. Mahidevran, mother of the elder Prince Mustafa, has the natural argument. Firstborn son, beloved of soldiers. The city chants his name softly in the baths. Mahidevran's wound is seniority threatened. She knows how quickly corridors forget yesterday's favorite when a new cradle swings. Between these women grows a hedge of courtesies with thorns. There is a wound in the men's world too. Ibrahim Pasha, once the Sultan's companion, now Grand Vizier until 1536, believed friendship could be welded to office. He decorated rooms with ancient motifs, signed with a confidence that looked like a crown in certain light. His fall, summoned at night, silenced by dawn, teaches everyone how far affection can carry you and where it stops. The lesson bruises Hürrem with relief and terror both. The palace grants and ungrants like a tide. Rumor moves like incense, visible for a moment, then everywhere. It insists Hürrem bewitched the Sultan with knots and moon water, that she struck Mahidevran in a quarrel and bled her pride onto the tiles, that a letter, perfumed and careful, steered campaigns and pushed Ibrahim toward the silken end. Rumor says a cup of coffee handed at the wrong hour means a province lost, that the Janissaries already chant Mustafa after dark. Rumor is a lazy historian but a keen weather vane. You lean toward paper, not smoke. The surviving notes show a woman writing about alms, dowries for orphan girls, repairs to a fountain, and between the lines, the placement of a trusted aga in a passage that matters. She asks for a bathhouse to be warmed for a sick servant. She sends cloth to the widow of a man the empire forgot. Then in the next paragraph she touches Karaman, Amasya, Manisa, provinces where princes are trained, and you feel how the ink itself leans toward heirship. Scholars of a later winter bring the sentence you will need again and again, setting it on the cushion like a small brazier. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. It warms the room without excusing it, and there is another wound you can taste on the air. Valide Sultan. The Valide, mother of Suleiman, dies in 1534. The axis shifts. Without that still star, the women's court tilts toward whoever can seem most like order in a house of tides. Harem learns to fold obedience around strategy. Fewer jewels, more account books. Fewer fireworks, more favors remembered. She practices patience as a weapon. She practices quiet. You hear bracelets settle like chains deciding not to rattle. Somewhere a scribe breathes on a seal to make it shine. When you touch the wall, the stone holds heat the way a body holds a memory. In this palace, the wounds do not bleed, they vote. And tonight, in the room that pretends to be only pillows and song, those wounds will decide which boy becomes a man the empire must obey, and which mother becomes a story the empire will deny. You learn that palaces run not on love or law, but on bonds, threads spun in private that the state will later call policy. The room smells of incense cooling over iron decisions. Silk muffles the hinge, fact steadies the candle. In 1539, the Sultan's daughter Mihrima marries Rustem Pasha. By 1544, he becomes Grand Vizier, a rise as clean as a minaret's line. The ledger calls it alliance. The harem calls it family. Between Harem and her daughter grows the first bond, mother to mirror, counsel to courier. Between Harem and Rustem grows the second, strategy to instrument, ink to seal. The divan will sign what this room decides. You watch how a glance becomes a letter becomes a posting becomes a future. The Kızlar Ağa, Chief Black Eunuch, holds the gate between women's counsel and men's handwriting. His silence is a road. A Kalfa pours coffee strong enough to wake ambition. A young scribe kneels with a travel wallet, memorizing the route to Amasya or Manisa, where princes are forged. You hear the bond form in the quiet. One woman speaks, another nods. The eunuch lifts a brow, and somewhere a governor begins to pack. Rumor, perfumed and stubborn, presses its face to the screen. It says Harem has bewitched the Sultan, that knots and moonlit water guide his pen, that the new vizier owes his soul to a woman's ring. It whispers darker, that a prince, Mustafa, eldest and beloved, stands too tall in soldiers' songs, and that midnight council has decided to shadow him with reports until the dawn finds him dangerous. The rumor smiles as rumors do, confident that men prefer spells to systems. You lean toward the paper on the table. It does not believe in spells. It lists stipends, gift cloth, appointments for tutors and imams, routes for messengers, audience times that make accidents possible and others impossible. When the Valide was alive, she kept these threads from tangling. With her gone, 1534, Harem learns to braid faster. Favors to the Janissary Agus, harms to widows whose sons wear white felt caps, letters to Mihrima that read like prayers and travel like knives wrapped in wool. The favorite consort in green silk bends her head. You hear Rustem's name stand taller in the air. If Mustafa shines at Amasya, then Selim must shine elsewhere. If soldiers sing one lullaby, the accountants must hum another. This is not poison. It is placement. It is how empires keep their wrists from being seized by songs. Breathe incense in, iron out. Across centuries, in a winter hung with careful footnotes, scholars put down their pens long enough to let one sentence warm the room. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. The line does not condemn. It refuses to excuse. It simply sits beside the rumor and keeps it honest. Fact returns to touch the map with a fingernail. Amasya for Mustafa. Karaman and Konya in someone else's purview. Rustem learning, which petitions to slow and which to speed. A bond tightens each time a request is regretfully delayed, or a courier is met at the city gate by a friend he did not expect. By morning men will call it coincidence. By noon they will call it governance. The night cools. The pearl-inlaid box closes with a soft answer. The eunuch takes the letters, a bouquet of decisions dressed as courtesy. You understand the forbidden bond now. It is not seduction. It is access. It is the right to turn a mother's breath into a root, a daughter's smile into a signature, a son's cradle into a map. Somewhere beyond the lattice, the Bosphorus exhales. The empire turns on hinges you cannot see, and the hinges are women. You watch how order is staged in a palace that pretends to be asleep. Silk to the eye, iron in the script, incense to blur the seam. No shouts, only trays and papers moving at the same speed as breath. The Kızlar Ağa, chief of the Black Eunuchs, stands at the hinge between rooms, where women's counsel becomes men's handwriting. A Kalfa pours coffee the color of caution. A note arrives with no crest, only the weight of the hand that folded it. Fact sets the lantern on the floor so you can see. In 1544, Rustem Pasha is appointed Grand Vizier. The Divan names it merit, but the Harem recognizes family. Petitions begin to travel in two stacks, the ones that must ripen on warm windowsills, and the ones that must be served while the seal is still soft. You see the method. Audience times adjusted, centuries rotated. Post-writers replaced without changing a single rule. The law remains the law. Only timing changes, and timing is a blade with perfect manners. Breathe, incense in, iron out. Rumor pads across the carpets with tender feet. It swears Harem keeps a poison ring, that the bath steam is laced with whispers to soften a stubborn heart, that the coffee handed after sunset decides a province by dawn. It says Mustafa's name is sung too loudly in the barracks at Amasya, that soldiers tuck his syllables into their belts the way they keep flints, that a mother's letter has asked Rustem to test that loyalty before it grows teeth. Rumor loves spells more than schedules. It loves guilt that can be worn like perfume. You press your fingers to the table where the real work happens. On the waxboard, lists of stipends for widows until Ramadan ends, repair orders for a cracked fountain at the Harem gate, an instruction for the chief white eunuch to seat a certain imam near a certain prince at a certain lesson, a courier's route adjusted by an hour, so he meets the right friend under the wrong moon. The Valide's absence since 1534 has left silence at the top. Harem learns to make that silence speak, soft, exact, and binding. A servant lays down a map of Amasya beside another of Karaman. Touchpoints gleam where Janissary gasp a gifted cloth, and where grain will arrive slightly early. A pearl-inlaid box opens to reveal a seal too plain to betray its sender. You understand the quiet threat. Not steel in the corridor, but consistency. A patience that starves one rumor and feeds another until an outcome appears inevitable and merciful at once. Across centuries, you hear scholars lean in over winter desks and lay their warming sentence like a small brazier between us. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. The words do not accuse or absolve. They keep the air honest while the incense cools. Fact returns with a date that carries dust and drumbeats. In 1548-1549, Suleiman leads the second Persian campaign. In his absence, letters multiply. By the time he turns homeward, reports on Mustafa read differently in different hands. His piety brighter in one, his popularity darker in another. None of it breaks the law. All of it aims the law. In the galleries, men will say the divan was sober. Here in the harem, the cups and clauses were arranged so sobriety could only choose one road. The favorite consort in green silk says very little. A eunuch picks up the sealed packet as if it were a prayer bowl. Somewhere a musician misses a note and blushes. You hear the empire settle into its chosen posture, the way a swordsman settles before a cut. Silk stirs, iron waits. The night lets its candles shorten without hurrying them. And you finally recognize the simplest trap in the world. A door that stays open a moment too long for one man and a moment too short for another, so that tomorrow the divan can say the path decided the traveler. The lamps burn lower, and the palace learns the color of decision. You hear canvas breathe like a sleeping animal, the great campaign tents near Konya, the earth smelling of dust and iron. The year is 1553. The Sultan has returned from the Persian front, and the air is brisk enough to make every word sound clean. A corridor of eunuchs stands as still as punctuation. Somewhere a muezzin folds the last note back into his chest. Fact does not hurry, but it arrives. Shehzade Mustafa, eldest son of Suleiman, beloved by soldiers, is summoned to his father's presence near Ereğli. He walks through a lane of faces that used to be certain. The guards who once shouted his name like a drum now grip their hands as if prayer requires fists. In the Sultan's tent, the rugs are thick enough to swallow noise. When mutes step from the lining, they bring with them the empire's soft iron. Breathe. Incense in. Iron out. Rumor moves faster than the dust, shameless as always. It swears that Rustam Pasha forged letters to make Mustafa look like a traitor to the Shah, that Harem breathed those letters toward the throne like perfume, that a single coffee offered at the wrong hour carried a verdict no soldier could blunt. Another rumor, colder, edicts the first, that Mustafa's popularity already forced the law's hand, that the string about to tighten is the bowstring succession always keeps ready for its own sons. Between them truth flickers like a lamp that refuses to gutter and refuses to blaze. He bows once, prince to father, hope to verdict. The tent closes around him like patient lungs. You think of Amasya, of barracks that sang his name, of Mahidevran pressing prayers into linens until they smelled like salt. You think of a ledger, where numbers have been quietly moving for years. You look for mercy and find procedure, the importunate cousin of law. Across a future winter, scholars warm their hands over dispatches that will never fully agree, and the caretaking sentence lays itself between us like a small brazier. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. The words keep the air honest, while the tent listens to its own fabric. Mustafa steps forward when his name is called. Once, exactly. The mutes close like a door deciding to be shut. No sword sings. Only the rug remembers wait. Outside, a Janissary Aga coughs and does not dare again. Inside, a prince's body learns the old lesson of empires, that love cannot be notarized, and that succession is a verb men pronounce with their hands. You do not hear a cry. You hear a decision finishing itself, the way a seal cools and is no longer wax but law. The tent opens, and the night does what nights do. It continues, indifferent and total. Somewhere the Sultan sits with his forehead in his palm a long time. Somewhere Harem breathes as if the air might splinter. Your mouth forms a line before your mind can stop it, soft as silk pulled through a ring. My ending was already signed. You do not know if it belongs to Mustafa, to Rustam, to a mother whose letters learned to walk. You only know the sentence fits the room. When the news reaches the camp, it travels without words. Men put down cups. Officers look at their hands as if their hands have suddenly aged. The divan will find phrases tomorrow. The soldiers find silence tonight. On the map, Amasya dims. In the harem, a pearl-inlaid box closes with a sound too polite to be victory. Silk stirs. Iron waits. The wind presses on the canvas, and the tent answers like a held breath. And you, standing at the edge of the lamplight, understand what broke not a law but a balance, the fragile agreement between song and seal. Morning enters the palace with paper in its hands. The ink is dry. The silk is folded. The iron goes back where children cannot see it. Courtyards hear the news the way stone hears rain. By weight, not words. Fact comes first because day demands it. In 1553, after the tent at Ereğli, Shehzade Mustafa is gone. Rustam Pasha is dismissed in the storm of soldiers' anger, then restored by 1555, the year the empire settles with Safavid Iran in the Treaty of Amasya. Harem Valide in 65, Suleiman in 1566. The throne will pass to Selim II. The law of succession survives. The songs do not. You walk the galleries and watch erasure do its tidy work. It is not a bonfire. It is housekeeping. A portrait is moved to a cooler wall. A calligrapher copies a decree with the pronoun trimmed, so that guilt belongs to no one living. Pay lists are updated. Stipends ceased, escorts reassigned. The ciphered M uncurled into something floral. A bathhouse attendant forgets to mention a name when she tells a story to a new girl. Her eunuch returns a ring to a chest and writes miscellaneous beside it. This is how an empire chooses which corners of its memory the light should love. Rumor keeps its old appetite, warmed by grief. It swears a bowstring flickered in the lamplight, that letters were forged, that coffee and counsel did what swords could not. It names Harem and Rustem with the ease of a crowd telling itself who to blame. Then another rumor, colder and more permanent, reminds the city that princes are not sons. They are roads, and roads are cleared when they lead to different capitals. Between these versions, truth breathes like a lamp that neither gutters nor flares. Breathe incense in. Iron out. Across a later winter, scholars warm their hands above dispatches and endowments, and the sentence you have learned to trust arrives like a small brazier set between us. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. The line does not acquit or condemn. It keeps the air honest while the ledgers finish closing. Fact returns with the quiet noise of continuity. Mihrima writes to Suleiman in a hand steady enough to cross seas. Waqf records preserve Hurrem's charitable works beside the dates of campaigns. Rustem's name appears, vanishes, and returns, as if governance were a tide that remembered every footprint. In the barracks, the janissaries resume drill. In the kitchens, the apricots still arrive. The muezzin's voice leans out over the courtyards with the same discipline as before. The empire's most unsettling talent is not violence. It is normalcy. You pause at a lattice where the Bosphorus breathes its patient silver. Somewhere in the women's court, a Khalfa instructs a new girl on which doors are never knocked and which names are never said. Somewhere in the records, a clerk writes transferred where he means ended. Somewhere in the men's hall, a vizier praises prudence, and everyone agrees because prudence is the word empires use when they have chosen necessity. By noon, the palace pulse is regular again. By night, it will be as if a prince's shadow was always this length. That is how erasure works when silk, control, and quiet threats have done their service. What cannot be praised is shelved. What cannot be shelved is retold. And what cannot be retold is left outside the map. You touch the lip of a coffee cup, cooling on a tray, and feel the faint echo of a decision no one will sign twice. Your breath stacks neatly with the palace breathing, and for a moment you believe the story has decided itself. It didn't. Even now, there is a sealed letter they refuse to release. Let the palace dim until it is only breath and stone. Lamps fall to embers. The lattice turns the Bosphorus into quiet silver lines. You are no longer in the midnight room where cups and clauses decided a prince. You are someplace softer, where incense thins, silk cools, and iron goes back to sleeping under the floor. Set down the names Harem, Mahidevran, Mustafa, Rustem, Suleiman, like bracelets unclasped and placed in a velvet tray. They do not argue. They rest. The seals cool. The letters forget their heat. The map remembers only rivers and roads. What belonged to night can belong to silence again. Breathe in, slow through the nose, until your ribs loosen like curtains in a breeze. Hold, let the hush gather around you. Breathe out, long. Let worry step outside and close the door behind it. Somewhere a Khalfa smooths a pillow. Somewhere a eunuch counts keys and finds the number right. The water in the courtyard fountain keeps its small arithmetic. One drop, then one, then one, untroubled by decrees. If a rumor knocks, let it pass down the corridor like a draught you do not invite to stay. The city sleeps. The sea keeps watch. A last candle steadies on its wick, lowers, steadies, lowers. Its light is enough for one more breath, then one more, then one, You are safe in the quiet the story leaves behind. What was heavy can be folded. What was sharp can be placed out of reach. When you close your eyes, the night will keep what it must and release what it can. The ember dims. The room cools. Rest.